Hi, my name is Steve Copeland. I decided to update my series on macroevolution as I was not happy with the quality of the earlier videos, and also I wanted to add more material. As to the terminology I will be using, the following. When I use the term macroevolution, or just evolution, I'll be referring to the theory of Darwinian evolution, which claims that one species can evolve into a different species, as in, for example, a reptile to a bird. When referring to change within a species, I will use the term adaptation rather than microevolution, as some people found this confusing. And a few words about my views regarding the Bible and science. I believe in the divine inspiration of Scripture. However, I do not believe that Scripture was written to give detailed and scientific explanations of the cosmos. The Bible begins with a summary statement that in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth, and then the following verses unpack a sequence. Now, fundamentalists will insist that everything in the known universe was created in 6 literal 24-hour days. Other Christians who have a far deeper knowledge of Hebrew than I insist that a non-literal interpretation of these verses on creation is even more likely. For me, the purpose of Scripture is connected with revealing God's attributes and how human beings can be in an eternal relationship with Him. In other words, salvation. And this is my sole purpose in making these videos. It doesn't bother me at all if ancient Israelites may have thought that the earth was flat or a globe, as it does not affect salvation or divine inspiration. I consider modern-day flat earthers to be foolish conspiracy theorists who, if they claim to be Christians, need to be focusing on making disciples rather than endless, pointless arguments. Furthermore, I utterly reject the idea that proven scientific discoveries and creation are incompatible. Therefore, I make a distinction between unproven and unprovable scientific theories and proven scientific facts. As far as I'm concerned, the facts point to an intelligent designer, a creator, and most theories are simply people trying to deny these facts or fit them into their atomist, atheist worldview. So, in this series, we're going to examine the most serious issues regarding evolution, the missing links, defining natural selection, the Big Bang Theory, intelligent design, and challenge some of the claims of leading atheists who promote evolution theory as facts. Having said where I stand, let's begin. At some stage in our lives, the majority of people become aware of ourselves as individuals and begin to ask some big questions. Who am I? What am I? Am I a product of evolution, a consequence of random chance, or was I created by a supernatural being who designed the universe? Now, the way that we answer these questions will determine everything in our lives. If the universe is just a mindless cosmic accident, then life has no real purpose. The same forces which made it happen may just collapse into a black hole and destroy the entire universe. My birth, my life, career, marriage, children, none of it has any lasting purpose if there is not a creator designer. However, if this universe was designed, then life must have a purpose, simply because no one designs or creates anything without intention, without a purpose and a goal. The place we are born, our parents' beliefs, our cultures, traditions, and type of education can have an enormous effect on what we initially believe. As children, we are easily brainwashed because we have a powerful desire to please our parents and be accepted by those around us. But there comes a time in our lives when we should question what we have been taught, no matter what our parents' cultures or traditions say. Otherwise, we are not truly owning our self-identity, but simply acting like mindless manufactured copies being pumped out in a factory, whether it's a Christian, Muslim, atheist, Hindu, or any other assembly line. So, question everything, dig into the details, and determine who you are and what you believe. And understand that belief must be based on evidence, otherwise it is not real biblical belief. It's your life, and contrary to reincarnation theories, I believe you only have one of them. What you believe and how you live may have eternal consequences for when you leave this world. Now, in our modern world, we are basically offered two systems of belief concerning the origins of life: evolution or creation. Now, is it possible to know which is true and which is false? So in this series, we're going to examine the theory of evolution, firstly its history, its frauds, and why evolutionists have become a lot less vocal in the last 5 years. In the subsequent videos regarding evolution theory, I will at times be referring to Michael Denton's two very accessible and understandable books, Evolution: A Theory of Crisis, which was published in the 1980s, and Evolution: Still a Theory in Crisis, published in 2016. Now, I consider Denton's work to be very objective. He is a microbiologist of world renown and a naturalist, a scientist who has no religious affiliations. Yes, Denton now believes in intelligent design. However, he insists that he's not a theist, rather he is an agnostic. Denton doesn't just give his own views in his books. He quotes dozens and dozens of fellow scientists and shows that Darwinian evolution is both outdated and has been proven to be false against the latest scientific discoveries. Now, several die-hard evolutionists have tried to refute Denton's first book, claiming that he had a wrong understanding of natural selection and that he misrepresented evolution theory, at least their view of the theory. However, his second book on evolution, written 30 years later, addresses these critiques and presents the latest scientific discoveries, such as the genetic toolbox, which points to evidence that although the fundamental biological gene markers within DNA can evolve, certain genes which differentiate between species are non-adaptable. Denton offers this and other recent discoveries as proof of intelligent design. So firstly, how do we end up with the theory of evolution? Evolution theory did not just happen through some scientific revelation. Rather, it started in Europe as an objection and a rejection of religion, especially Christianity. Now, from the moment Christianity joined the Roman Empire in the 4th century, it changed. The Roman Catholic Church plunged Europe into what became known as the Dark Ages. People were converted by force. Anyone who dared to question the popes were labeled as heretics, tortured, and murdered. And like Islam, which began in the 6th century, they forced millions to submit or die. The Roman Catholic Church became an incredibly wealthy and powerful institution. It banned anyone except priests from reading the Bible for 500 years, and it even murdered those later who tried to translate the Bible into the common language for the common people. People were kept in the dark. The popes decided who went to heaven or hell. People lived in fear because fear was the best way to control them. The Protestant Reformation in the 16th century was a protest against the immorality and the power of the Roman Catholic Church, but sadly, it became a political battle, plunging Europe into a war for 30 years, from 1618 to 1648. The 30 Years' War was brutal. In a sense, it was the last dying breath of Christendom, for it was obvious that the papacy could no longer control Europe and beyond. When the dust settled, Europe was like a group of states divided into Lutheran, Calvinist, or Roman Catholic. For the vast majority of Europeans, Christianity was not a personal relationship with God, but rather an allegiance to the state, to traditions, and to a national identity. The atrocities of religious war and the denominational fanaticism which Voltaire reflected on and condemned in his book Reflections on Religion moved people's hearts away from authoritarian religion to a search for a reasonable religion of tolerance with an individualistic flavor. The celebration of individual potential, which was highlighted at the Renaissance and the Reformation, was to be given a motto later in the 18th century by Immanuel Kant, who challenged people to dare to think for themselves, sapere aude. Prior to this, the French philosopher and mathematician René Descartes who lived from 1596 to 1650, made his famous statement regarding the importance of reason. I think, therefore I am. Descartes searched for a first principle on which to lay a starting point for his understanding of the existence of God, building on Aquinas' ontological argument. Now, he postulated that science relies on the senses, but can they indeed be trusted? By positing this type of doubt, Descartes deduced that if he was aware that he was doubting, then he must be thinking, and therefore existing. Cogito ergo sum, I think, therefore I am. For Descartes, reason must be the foundation for proving truth, but this idea developed into a debate about how we determine knowledge which is provable and beliefs which may be unprovable. John Locke, 1632 to 1704, and David Hume, 1711 to 1776, were prominent in this debate. Locke studied medicine at Oxford, and he perceived the human mind as a blank sheet which receives ideas and knowledge through the senses. Reason, therefore, can help to judge what we sense, but the senses provide the basis of knowledge. Hume is best remembered for his writings as a skeptic. He believed that it was impossible to prove the existence of the soul, stating that when we look into ourselves we see only some feeling of pleasure or pain, but never the self as such. Hume believed that the idea of a first cause was useless, and he also ruled out miracles on the grounds that they presumably violate the laws of nature. C.S. Lewis pointed out the contradictions and false assumptions in Hume's philosophy. Gotthold Lessing, 1729 to 1781, stated that if the miracles recorded in the New Testament could not be repeated in the present, then why should we believe them? At a similar time, and in his book The Critique of Pure Reason, the philosopher Immanuel Kant stated that there was an uncrossable line between the supernatural and the natural worlds. So basically, an existential encounter or relationship with God was not just unlikely, but probably impossible. In a famous sentence he wrote, "I have therefore found it necessary to deny knowledge in order to leave room for faith." Now this statement simply proved Kant's ignorance of a biblical definition of faith, which is knowledge via revelation and or conviction, and acting upon that knowledge, the result being an existential encounter and an ongoing relationship with God. Now, in most of Europe, Protestant Christianity was a spiritless tradition with rules to govern human behavior. However, in contradiction to Kant's theory, two spiritual revivals broke out in parts of Europe and the American colonies, which are called the Great Awakenings. These revivals saw over 1 million people claiming to have had an existential encounter with God, which was substantiated by their changed lives. By the end of the 18th century, Europeans were so convinced that reason was everything that they created the goddess of reason. During the French Revolution on August 10, 1793, just a few years before Darwin was born, the French Convention desecrated the Catholic Cathedral of Notre Dame and put their goddess on a throne in that church. By the turn of the 19th century, naturalism was well established in Europe, especially among academics. 3 men would lead the charge against religions and lay the foundation that would be termed the Brave New World, a world which would seek to eradicate belief in God and see human beings rise to godlike status. Those men were Karl Marx, Friedrich Nietzsche, and Charles Darwin. Karl Marx criticized religion as the poor man's opium and a means to control people and economies. His theories became the foundational ideologies of atheist communism and were put into practice by Lenin. But communism failed to understand the fundamental selfish nature of the human heart. Therefore, tens of millions were murdered in the Soviet Union by communist leaders enforcing so-called equality, while at the same time creating oligarchs. Friedrich Nietzsche, 1884 to 1900, claimed that God is dead. We had killed the idea of God because we no longer needed him. Now humanity would charge into the future without religion to hold us back. Nietzsche's hatred for Judaism and Christianity was directed at the priests. According to Nietzsche, Judaism had created God and his commands to use guilt and shame to control the masses, and Christianity had simply perfected this idea. In his book, Will to Power, Nietzsche speaks of the elevation of self, the advance of a master race and a superman to lead that, and of himself he wrote the following. He said that he is the equal of Socrates and Christ, a philosopher who would break world history in two. I am no man, he exulted. I am dynamite. One day my name will be associated with something tremendous, and there will be wars the like of which have never been seen on earth. It is only beginning with me that the earth knows great politics. Ecce Homo 4.1. Nietzsche's Will to Power was a favorite book of two 20th century tyrants, Joseph Stalin and Adolf Hitler, both who considered themselves to be this Superman of Nietzsche's prediction. The wars that Nietzsche predicted began less than 2 decades after his death. Charles Darwin, 1809 to 1882, would be the man to provide a theory of explaining human existence without any reference to God or religion, and so the journey of evolution began, and we will learn much more about Darwin in the subsequent videos. The 19th century marks a pivotal moment in human history. Many were convinced that religion was a chain binding human progress through guilt, shame, and hatred for self. This brave new world mentality was convinced that, without religious shackles, humanity would eliminate wars, make incredible discoveries, wipe out all disease, bring economic equality to all, and bury any belief in God once and for all. In the next video in this series, we're going to be discussing what is meant by natural selection and the differences between macro and micro evolution. You may not be aware of this, but the vast majority of evolutionists use the adaptation of species as proof of the origins of life. Adaptation is a natural and scientific truth, but macroevolution is a carefully constructed lie with absolutely no scientific evidence. Like me, you've had this theory rammed down your throat from the time you started school, and many of you proudly call yourselves atheists because you've been sucked into that theory or because it suited your lifestyle. The vast majority of atheists I know have a very simple agenda. They refuse to have any divine being interfering in how they live their lives. And yes, I too have an agenda. Since I met Christ over 40 years ago, I have witnessed many people come to know him and seen their lives utterly transformed by that experience and their ongoing relationship with him. It is seeing the lasting joy in such people which motivates me. Give yourself the opportunity to know the truth. Pull back the curtain and see what's behind the curtain. Have the common sense to question everything and then decide what you believe and how you will proceed. Life is a precious gift, and you only get one of them. Please, don't waste it. I hope this video has been a good introduction about the birth of evolution theory. Thank you for liking and subscribing and supporting the channel. I look forward to your comments and seeing you in the next video. God bless.